Greg, is there a real case here that the government's policy on returning Aussies from India and the threats of fine and jail could actually be unlawful?
Well, certainly I think that's debatable. The Australian Lawyers Alliance that I work with, we have been doing a bit of work on this, and I think that's our view, and it's a view of a number of others. One of the reasons for saying that is because under the Biosecurity Act, the least restrictive option and one that's proportionate to the issue is one which has to be adopted by the government. This is an extreme measure under any criteria, and so therefore on that basis alone would be challengeable.
So it is susceptible to a challenge. Do you think that we'll actually see legal action progress? Is anyone saying they're going forward with this?
Well, look, certainly I think some groups, I think, and some lawyers have been having a look at it. I think the issue, though, Ash, is that government seems to be now backtracking. It's quite extraordinary that the government, having been very firm on this on Sunday, we heard the Prime Minister this morning saying, oh, well, we're not actually going to use it. So the question is whether or not it's simply been a political threat or whether or not it's going to be used. If it is going to be used, then I would expect it to be challenged.
Well, you're right. I mean, Scott Morrison said this morning that Australians actually being fined or jailed is pretty much zero, I think was the language he used. So you wonder if it is an empty threat, what is the point of that?
Well, it's a weird style of law enforcement. I mean, last year, when it came to the UK and the United States, as a number of people have pointed out, including Andrew Bolt, rightly, there was no mention of this aspect of the Biosecurity Act being used. It was used in the context of India, and one has to wonder why. And particularly when the government's now saying, well, actually, we didn't really mean it. I mean, it's a bit like a police officer saying, look, I know the speed limit is 60, but if you're doing 80, we're not going to really worry about anybody who's doing it. I mean, it's a really odd way of sending a message to the community.
I mean, the government's been falling heavily on the health advice here, saying that the health advice guided the policy. Are you suggesting there is something more sinister at play here? The government has been accused of racism in some quarters.
Well, I think, Andrew Bolt is one who said that. I mean, I think from our point of view, from the Australian Lawyers Alliance point of view, we're concerned about the lawfulness, but also about the inhumanity of the decision. And it seems to us and to many lawyers that this is using and abusing what is already a very draconian law. I mean, the Biosecurity Act has measures in it which are draconian, and they should only be used in circumstances where there is no alternative. I mean, what the government's done here, of course, is refuse to use its constitutional power to ensure an effective quarantine system in Australia, instead landing it on the states. And so now it's left really with playing politics with a draconian piece of legislation. It ought not be doing that. It's a dangerous thing to do, and it's I think backfired.
Greg, I follow you on Twitter. I'm sure a lot of our viewers do. You tweeted this morning, it's Tampa again. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is it has some the hallmarks of Tampa, Ashley. That is that using, and of course in the context of Tampa, we had the extraordinary spectacle of legislation by the Howard government, which would have suspended the rule of law and allowed a military personnel to push the Tampa boat back into the waters of the Indian Ocean. Here you've got a similar threat by the Morrison government in relation to an extreme law in order to make a political point. And because there is always that border fetish in Australia, and it seems to me that what's happened in this particular case is that this has been a convenient use of the Biosecurity Act for a political purpose. Otherwise, why would the Prime Minister say this morning, well, actually, we're not really going to use it? As I say, it's extraordinary, but it does have some hallmarks of the politics of Tampa about it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. We are seeing a bit of a shift, as you say, in the rhetoric on it today. Greg, just finally, we've just marked World Press Freedom Day. You act as an advisor to the Australian Assange campaign, working to free Julian Assange. Where's that up to? What's the next step?
So the next step in that, Ash, is that there've been submissions filed. It's a determination has to be made by a single judge as to whether or not 3 judges will hear it. In other words, the Court of Appeal. That process is happening at the moment. I mean, I would make this point that in World Press Freedom Day is somewhat ironic, given the Assange case. But that's where the case is at, and it's continuing to be pursued with full vigour. And again, I mean, as we've been saying right from the start, now is the time for the Australian government to get involved in this case, because I don't think there's any great appetite on the part of the Biden administration for this particular case. I think it's allowing the court process to continue, but there does need to be an end point.
Greg Barns, always appreciate you taking the time to join us on Newsday. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ashley.